Seeking to constantly expand their bottom line, agrochemical companies began to play with GMOs, genetically modified organisms. But what is a GMO? It's an organism which has had an external gene artificially inserted to give it new properties. For example, corn. Here's the DNA that will be modified. Then you find the organism containing the new gene to be introduced. Animals, plants, bacteria, the spectrum of living organisms is wide. Not this one, not this one. Ah, this bacteria is just the one. We isolate the gene. We introduce the DNA into the corn and there we go. This is called transgenetifying. With transgenetifying, the natural cycle is short-circuited. For thousands of years, seeds were produced naturally by plants. Now they're produced in laboratories. Today, there are two types of GMO made, those that produce their own pesticides and those that resist certain herbicides. But as a result of being exposed to them, weeds and insects develop a resistance to these products. They mutate. In order to get rid of them, you have to use higher doses of chemical products or different pesticides.
So much. So you use chemicals, and nothing kills those bloody weeds better than Roundup from Monsanto. The famous makers of Joni Mitchell's favourite DDT, Agent Orange, which aside from the occasional birth defect, did a great job of destroying the rice fields during the Vietnam War, the cow-swelling bovine growth hormone, and PCB, everyone's favourite carcinogenic environmental pollutant. But with the revolutionary key ingredient in Roundup, glyphosate, the folks at Monsanto have added not just enormous profits to their bottom line, but also the word probably in front of the word carcinogenic. Monsanto, making the definite probable since 1901. But two pesky questions still remain. How do you spray your crops to kill weeds without killing the crops as well? And how does a company with a terrible health and environmental track record, but also one of the biggest patents in the history of agriculture, keep the profits rolling in when the patent runs out? Easy. Take all that hard-earned experience making poisons that kill things and start making food for people to eat. Throughout the 90s, Monsanto began modifying the DNA of basic staple crops to make them resistant to Roundup. Now, we'll save the much-needed discussion on the dangers of messing with the DNA of something you put in your mouth and feed to your cattle for another episode. We should also point out that this technology doesn't give the plant some magic force field that deflects the Roundup. It still absorbs just as much poison as the weeds. It just somehow survives. And Monsanto more than survived. Thanks to this nature tweak, they now control in the US market 80% of corn and 93% of soy. And as market forces and political influence. I know, you're about to switch off. Oh, come on, Dan, big business controls politics, tell us something we don't know. But the example I'm about to give you is an absolute doozy. Remember back in 2013 when the US government faced total shutdown? Well, just before the legislation they needed to keep the lights on was passed, a Missouri senator and the Joker disguised as a human, Roy Blunt, secretly attached an unrelated amendment which the good folks at Monsanto helped to write. It gave very open-ended powers to prevent the US judiciary from banning or limiting the sale of Monsanto products, even if adverse health effects were revealed. The legislation passed, but expired later through a sunset clause in September 2013. Even still, this raises a veritable cornucopia of WTFs. Firstly, the wording of the amendment suggests that Monsanto knew that adverse health effects were inevitable. It's the legislative equivalent of Bill Clinton spraying Monica's dress with Scotchgard. Always be prepared. Second, for an amendment that strange, irrelevant, and largely unprecedented to pass would require at least 50% of US senators to either agree with the legislation or be too lazy to read it. Okay, so that's less of a WTF and more of an NSS. And third, how are we in a situation where the provider of a huge slice of the world's food bowl is synonymous with adverse health effects?
The agrochemical multinationals are imposing GMOs on the planet. After the USA and South America, it's now the turn of Asia and Southern Africa. Once upon a time, farming looked something like this. Nowadays, fields look more like this. The polycultures and biodiversity of southern countries have been swallowed up by monocultures, with the sole aim of producing vegetable protein for mass animal husbandry in the industrial countries. Who now knows that most processed foods contain genetically modified soya, maize or rape, and that the same GMOs also serve to feed the animals whose products we consume? Granted, in Europe it's compulsory to label food of vegetable origin, but not animal products. And this information is in any case in very small print. This lack of transparency prevents consumers from having a free choice. But being able to choose GMO-free products helps the development of local agriculture, encourages biodiversity, promotes the financial independence of farmers, and reduces the overwhelming power of the multinationals.
Sure, Monsanto rejected the World Health Organization's findings, which wasn't surprising. But what was interesting was some of the major studies used to discredit those findings were authored by scientists who have acted as paid consultants to Monsanto. Because that's how the biggest agribusiness in the world rolls, using vast reserves of cash and influence to distract us all from the key question: why are we all being fed by a poison expert?